The race exploded into action the moment the starting horn sounded. The McFarland boys shot forward with confidence, refusing to let the taunts distract them. Seeing that an unknown kid from a tiny farming town was threatening to win, two competitors silently worked together to trap him. They boxed him in from both sides, trying to force him off his rhythm. For a moment, it almost worked. But Defies wasn't the type to back down. The runners from wealthier schools attacked the steep climbs with ease, while the McFarland boys began losing ground. Defies, who had led most of the race, suddenly found himself being passed one runner after another. By the time the race ended, McFarland had finished near the bottom of the standings. It was a crushing defeat. Danny crossed the finish line last for the team, completely exhausted, yet he still refused to quit before reaching the end. Instead of blaming his runners, White blamed himself. He admitted he had never bothered to study the course beforehand. Looking at the disappointed faces around him, he gathered everyone together. "This loss isn't on you, it's on me, but I promise you, we're not leaving things this way." That evening, however, White couldn't stop thinking about the race. Winning was supposed to help rebuild his coaching career, yet after such a poor performance, that dream seemed farther away than ever. When he arrived home, his wife reminded him about their daughter's birthday was the following day. After disappointing his family so many times in the past, White promised himself he wouldn't forget again. The next morning, training resumed. Since McFarland had no mountains nearby, White found enormous piles of harvested almonds stacked outside a processing facility. They became his hills. Again and again, he forced the runners to sprint to the top before racing back down. The workouts were brutal. Whenever someone complained, White reminded them that losing hurt far more than training. "The pain you're feeling now is temporary." Slowly, the boys became stronger. One afternoon, after an exhausting workout, White told everyone to complete one final climb before taking a break. Most of the runners stopped once they finished. Defies didn't. He kept running. Finally, he exploded. "What difference does any of this make?" His voice echoed across the empty fields. "You think running changes who we are? We're field workers. Our parents are field workers. And one day, we'll be field workers too." He pointed toward the endless farmlands surrounding them. "This is our life. We wake up before sunrise. We work. We sleep." Every word carried years of frustration. Years of watching dreams disappear before they ever had a chance to grow. Trying to prove his point, Defies charged toward the steep hill one more time. Halfway up, his exhausted legs gave out. He crashed to the ground. For a few seconds, he stayed there, pounding the dirt with his fists, screaming at a future he believed he could never escape. That night, Defies made a heartbreaking decision. He quit the team. Meanwhile, White returned home, only to discover he had made another terrible mistake. In the middle of worrying about his runners, he had completely forgotten his daughter's birthday. She was devastated. She refused to speak to him. Feeling guilty, White jumped into his car late that night, determined to buy a birthday cake before morning. As he drove through the darkness, he noticed someone sitting alone on a bridge overlooking the highway. He slowed down, then recognized the familiar face. It was Defies. The teenager sat silently on the edge, bruises covering his face. White came out of the car and quietly walked over. Little by little, the truth came out. Defies' older sister had become pregnant, placing even more pressure on their SA. His father, overwhelmed by stress and unable to provide enough money, had lashed out in anger. Grueling family. Trying to calm him down, Defies had been caught in the middle. Now the bruises on his face told the rest of the story. Trying to keep the conversation alive, White admitted something he had never told anyone. "I forgot my own daughter's birthday today." Defies glanced at him, surprised. White slowly stepped closer. Then he looked over the edge of the bridge. "If you jump from here," he said calmly, "it won't end your problems. You'll probably survive, but you'll destroy your legs. And if that happens, you won't be able to work or run. Your family would have to carry that burden forever." Those words made Defies hesitate. That brief moment was all White needed. He grabbed the teenager by the arm and pulled him safely away from the edge. From that night forward, everything changed. White stopped treating coaching as just another job. He buried himself in books about distance running, studied professional training methods, and redesigned every workout from scratch. Since the runners were far quicker than he could ever hope to be, White often followed them on his youngest daughter's tiny pink bicycle. The sight was so ridiculous that the boys couldn't stop laughing. The playful teasing slowly erased the distance between coach and team. They were no longer just students and a teacher. They had become a family. Several weeks later, McFarland received an invitation to compete in a dual meet against one of the strongest cross-country teams in the region. Their opponents weren't worried. As far as they were concerned, McFarland was simply another easy victory. The race began exactly as expected. The experienced team controlled the pace early while their coach confidently watched from the sidelines. He barely acknowledged White's presence, but mile after mile, the McFarland runners refused to fade. Instead, they grew stronger. One by one, they began overtaking runners who had underestimated them. By the final stretch, every position mattered. The scores were incredibly close. When officials finished adding the points, the crowd fell silent. McFarland had won by a single point. The boys exploded with excitement. For many of them, it was the first major victory of their lives. Only a few days later, the three Diaz brothers unexpectedly quit the team. White couldn't understand why. They had finally started winning. Why walk away now? Instead, he drove to their house after classes ended. The moment he arrived, their mother warmly welcomed him inside as if he were part of the family. She insisted he stay for dinner. No matter how many times White said he was full, she continued piling food onto his plate. Before he left, she even packed extra food for him to take home to his wife and daughters. White was deeply moved by their generosity. It didn't make sense. How could a family with so little be willing to give away so much? As he prepared to leave, the boy's father quietly pulled him aside. The reason they quit, it isn't because they don't love running, it's because we need them. He explained that he supervised a harvesting crew, and every day the family had to meet strict production quotas. Whenever the boys spent time training, fewer crops were picked. Less work meant less money. Running wasn't putting food on the table. The harvest was. White finally understood the impossible choice these families faced. The very next weekend, before sunrise, White arrived at the fields wearing work clothes instead of a whistle. Without saying much, he picked up a harvesting bucket and joined the crew. Within minutes, he realized just how difficult their daily lives truly were. The workers bent over for hours beneath the blazing sun. Their backs ached. White struggled to keep pace. The teenagers, meanwhile, moved through the fields with incredible speed. By midday, White was completely exhausted. His back screamed with pain. He could barely stand upright. For the first time, he truly experienced the burden his runners carried every single day before they even showed up to practice. From then on, training schedules changed completely. If harvest season demanded longer hours, practice started later. When race day approached, everyone worked together to finish the fields earlier. And whenever extra help was needed, White was right there beside them. That simple decision changed everything. The boys no longer called him Mr. White. From that day forward, they proudly called him only one thing: Coach.